I took the job because I needed quiet money and because I believed in the uncomplicated decency of Friday nights in small towns. The ad had been pinned to the corkboard outside the laundromat for 3 weeks, curling at the corners from steam and boredom. Babysitter needed, 3 Fridays a month, twins age 9, good pay, call after 5. The name at the bottom was neat, like the person who wrote it never rushed or smudged. The Merrills. I called, thinking about textbook fees and the noise my upstairs neighbor made whenever he rehearsed the same guitar riff for hours. A woman answered. Her voice had that pleasant hum some people are born with, like the sound of a fridge working in the next room. She introduced herself as Elaine, confirmed I could start that Friday, and told me, almost proudly, that the twins were quiet, old souls, and that I would barely know they were there. Then a pause, a soft adjustment. But they don't like the back bedroom. You can keep the door closed. The house was 2 streets off the library, older but well kept, with a porch as wide as a smile. It wore the kind of blue paint people only choose when they're sure winters will be kind and neighbors will wave. A porch light showed me the faint glitter of mica in the front path. Inside, the air smelled like lemon oil and cinnamon. Everything was orderly to the point of fussiness. Shoes lined up heel to heel, a stack of mail squared with the edge of a table, a row of cookbooks arranged from tallest to shortest. The husband, a tall man with a loosened tie and the relieved posture of someone about to be taken out to dinner, introduced himself as Peter. He tried for friendly and landed on polite. Elaine's hair was tucked behind both ears with identical care. She showed me the kitchen, the 2 mugs by the kettle, the phone numbers on the fridge, the pantry with labeled jars, the twins' room, and finally the back bedroom, door already closed as if it had closed itself. We used to use this as an office, she said, hand on the knob but not turning it. Then as a guest room, lately storage. A fragile smile, and then she added the line I would replay later. There's no need to go in there. The twins, Henry and Mira, watched me like owls watch, silently and with too much noticing. They had matching gray eyes, a shade that doesn't pick a side between blue and rain. They said hello in unison, and then, as if that were a trick they had practiced, split in half. Henry to the couch with a handheld console I couldn't name, Mira to the low bookshelf where she angled her head sharply to read spines. No chaos, no sticky hands, no cartoon theme songs. I felt sudden gratitude to whatever past babysitters had shaped this ease. Dinner was simple, macaroni with peas, sliced apples, and we ate together. They were polite, each thank you lodged in the correct place. When I asked about school, they traded answers like relay runners passing a baton. By the time the plates clinked empty in the sink, my shoulders had softened. I could almost forget the closed door at the end of the hall. Almost. It wasn't the sound that made me think about the back bedroom again. It was the way the house seemed to bend around it like a stream bends around a stone. The hall light didn't quite reach the frame. The baseboard there had the faint blistering that comes from furniture dragged too many times or a leak patched too late. Once, going to refill my water, I heard Mira behind me, speaking with the unstudied frankness of children who believe facts are helpful. You put the chair in front of it, right? What? I said, both amused and, if I'm honest, eager for the little thrill of a spooky conversation. The door. Henry didn't look up from his game. We sleep better when the chair's there. It doesn't open on its own, I said, because those are exactly the words a person says before they add a quiet and obvious but to themselves. It does sometimes, Mira said, when the wind has a bad dream. She said it lightly, like a rhyme that gets handed from playground to playground, gaining splinters with every telling. I laughed because laughter is a way to vote for reality. I got a dining chair and set it under the knob, not pressing the back against the wood like a barricade, but uselessly, symbolically, like talismans are supposed to be. The twins approved. We read a chapter from an old hardback about a boy and his flashlight and a friendly monster who was just misunderstood, and then I sent them to brush teeth. They moved like swans down the hall, synchronized, and jumped into their beds with the solemn ritual of trained divers entering water. I checked the locks, because my mother once told me that feeling safe is a habit, not a circumstance. When the front door clicked, the house shifted into the hush of rooms relaxing. I answered a text from my friend Zoe. "You alive? Send pic of the twins, they sound creepy," and sent her a photo of two perfectly ordinary black and white soccer trophies on the bookshelf instead. She sent back a skull emoji and the word vibes. I smiled, put my phone face down, and propped my feet on the ottoman. At first I thought the sound was a drip, a slow, careful tick off metal. Then I realized it wasn't water finding an edge. It was something counting. You know that feeling when you press your ear to a wall and hear the conversation of pipes and dust? It was that, but with intent. 3 ticks. Pause. 3 ticks. Pause. Like someone tapping a ring against a glass to get attention from the other side of a party you hadn't been invited to. I lifted my head, and in the way of new sitters in new houses, I told myself 17 reasonable things at once. Radiator. Tree branch. Refrigeration cycle. The house settling into itself like a sleeping animal. The chair shifted slightly in my mind, out of joke territory and into that old neighborhood where the adults once told us not to stare into basements. The tapping came again, and this time it didn't come from the kitchen or the front or the roof. It came from the direction of the closed door I wasn't supposed to open. The back bedroom measured its patience on the far side of wood and paint. I stood, almost to prove to myself how unbothered I was. I walked the length of the hall without turning the light on, as if I were trying not to disturb anyone, which was funny, because I think that's exactly what I was trying not to do. The chair sat where I'd left it, the invitation of its back a pale vertebra under the nightlight's weak glow. I thought about my keys, about the emergency numbers on the fridge, about the soft, even breath of 2 sleeping children in the room behind me. My hand made its own decision and fished my phone from my back pocket. The screen's rectangle a private moon. I opened the Notes app. I typed the time. There was a comfort in naming a moment. 8:42 p.m. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. You might think I'm performing a ritual here, a neat person arranging fear in drawers. You wouldn't be wrong. When the taps came again, the chair moved. Not much, not dramatically, but enough. A nudge, like someone on the other side had shifted weight and touched the door with their shoulder. The door's bottom edge made a whisper across the carpet, and the chair's back adjusted, an inch, maybe 2. My scalp tightened. I had the childish urge to say hello, but the adult part knew that sound would only make me part of whatever conversation had already started, whether I liked it or not. I thought about calling Elaine and Peter. I could imagine that conversation too vividly to do it. The awkward chuckle, the assurances about draft, about foundation, about how the back door sometimes pulls air when the furnace kicks. And there would be a pause at the end where I'd have to decide to insist or laugh. It's amazing how many decisions we make just to seem normal. Instead, I dragged the chair tighter, pressing 2 of its legs into the carpet until they left small crescent marks. I placed my palm flat against the grain of the wood and felt nothing at all. No hum, no heat, nothing that could be measured. Fear is so often a thing you can't show to other people except by doing something strange. I stayed there a beat longer than I needed to, then stepped back, shook out my hands, and told myself it was fine. It was fine. It was nothing. It was the wind digging through its pockets for its house keys. When I turned, Mira was there, halfway down the hall, hair a dark cutout against the dim. I didn't startle exactly. She didn't do anything dramatic either. She just stood the way kids stand when they know exactly how small they are in a wide grown-up world and are making themselves smaller to be polite. "Did it ask yet?" she whispered. "Did what ask?" I whispered back, "Because you match the tone you're given." "The room," she said. "Sometimes it asks first. Sometimes it knocks first. When it asks, you can tell it no." She rubbed one finger with the thumb of her other hand as if removing an invisible sticker. "What does it ask?" The ridiculousness of my question, the way it treated nonsense like it had rules, made me want to laugh, and I would have, if not for the gravity on the girl's face. "If you can read to it," she said. "It likes being read to. But then it gets greedy." Parents' voice rose in me, "You should be in bed." But a different voice I didn't recognize said, "Listen carefully to the rules you are being given by someone who has nothing to gain from lying." "Back to bed," I said softly, because I had to say something adult-shaped. I'll sit in the living room. If you wake up and you're scared, you call me." She nodded, not exactly reassured. "Don't open it," she said, and returned to bed with the unhurried acceptance of someone who has already watched the worst part of a movie and knows where to avert her eyes. When the house settled again and the night pressed its palms to the windows, I put on the kettle. Tea is a superstition that comes with its own props. The whistle startled me, then embarrassed me for being startled. I poured, breathed steam, and watched the front walk turn into a narrow rectangle of wet under the misty rain that had started while I wasn't looking. I told myself that I would sit here until the Merrills came home and that would be the end of it. The house would be an anecdote. I'd text Zoe a skull emoji back. We'd make jokes about haunted Zillow disclosures. The tapping changed. Started as before. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Then it found a rhythm more like syllables than numbers, hesitant and formal, like someone trying a new language. The word that arrived, assembled from the pauses and the wood's soft complaint, was my name. Not the syllables exactly, but that shape. The room asking if I could say who I was. I stood at the edge of the hall without meaning to. There was a line on the carpet there that wasn't strictly a line but might as well have been. Crossing it would mean we were negotiating. Fear has all kinds of taxonomy. There is the clean fear that happens right in front of a car bumper or a cliff edge, a bright flare that burns away almost instantly. Then there is the bureaucratic fear that arrives with paperwork and doctor appointments and envelopes you keep meaning to open. And then there is the fear that comes like rain soaking into wood, something you only notice when the shape has changed and the floor sags under your foot. I didn't open the door. I didn't even touch the chair. I spoke. "No," I said. My voice sounded folded, as if it had been stored in a drawer too long. I tried again, louder, as gently as I could. "No." The house rewarded me with quiet so deep I could hear the kettle cooling. I didn't sleep. Not because I was terrified, though I was, but because there was a sense that if I drifted even a little, some other part of me would wake in a different hallway. I downloaded a crossword and filled in boxes that pretended to be order. I watched the minute hand. I checked the twins once, twice, kept my eyes from slipping to the far end of the hall both times. 10:37. 11:1. At 11:19, headlights. The Merrills returned in a small storm of rain and laughter that died as soon as they crossed the threshold, as if the house tongued their noise away. "How was it?" Elaine's smile returned like the porch light relit. "They were good. They were angels," I said, and my mouth was already composing a decision. I would not tell them. Not tonight. Maybe not at all. Some things you can tell people and they'll rearrange their faces to be polite, and some things will cause a change you can't predict. But there was something about the way Peter looked over my shoulder toward the hall and then deliberately to the floor. It was so small a gesture I might have missed it if I hadn't been tuned so tightly. He was pretending not to see something. "Is there anything about the back room I should know?" I asked, and there went my decision, undone by my own curiosity dressed in good manners. Elaine's pleasant hum turned down a fraction. "It's just storage," she said, too quickly. "Old boxes. It used to be an office, but with the twins we needed." She stopped herself and recalibrated. "Why?" "I thought I heard knocking," I said, carefully neutral. "Maybe the wind." "Wind," Peter agreed, grateful for a noun he could hold. "We should get the weather stripping redone." I nodded. We exchanged the smooth things, payment, thank you, see you in 2 weeks. I put on my coat, which smelled like the damp edges of the night, and stepped into the rain. When I looked back, the house was a blue square of propriety with a dark far-right corner that resisted even the porch light. On the walk home, I kept checking my phone for a message from Zoe, so I could have a voice in my pocket telling me I was being dramatic. She had sent a photo of her cat in a box with the caption, He is finalizing our lease with the underworld. I typed the twins' house is weird and added no details and deleted it because I didn't want to start a small story that would grow teeth. 2 weeks later, I went back because that is the stupid, brave kindness of money and the rhythm of a schedule. The Merrills were dressed for another dinner. The exact same relief on their faces. And I wondered if Friday nights were someone's anniversary or truce. The chair was already in front of the back bedroom door this time, not pushed hard, but present the way a photo frame is present. Not blocking, proclaiming. I noticed, and they noticed me noticing, and the delicate social web vibrated for a second and then settled. The twins were midfield in a board game when I arrived, the kind with cards that smell faintly of basements and rules printed in fonts invented before irony. They glanced up, greeted me, and went back to negotiating the price of imaginary property. There was a contentment to it that made me feel like I had been trusted with something more than Mac and bedtime. Trust is a flattering key. You want to show you know how to hold it. At 8:04 the house cleared its throat again. Not the same rhythm as the first night. Something braver. Not knocking. Scraping as if the door had developed fingernails. I clicked my pen. The sound of a pen is the smallest weapon. This time I decided to try a rule before the room asked for one. I took the book we'd read the last time and sat cross-legged in the hall, well back from the door, the way you sit at the edge of a tide line. I opened to the chapter we hadn't reached. My voice felt silly at first. Why am I reading to Wood? But then it felt less silly, and then it felt exactly right, and then, as I crossed a sentence where the monster learns to say the boy's name correctly, the scraping stopped. What slid in behind the silence was not gratitude exactly, but it wasn't anger either. It had the quality of attention. I read for 15 minutes. I read until my mouth turned dry. I read until the exact feeling arrived that had frightened Mira. A greedy tug. The way a story pulls you to turn the page even when you promised yourself you'd go to bed. It didn't want an ending. It wanted a door. I closed the book and set it on my lap and said, very quietly and very clearly, no. The doorknob turned once. Not a full turn. Not enough to undo the latch, but enough to announce that it could. There's a line in a lot of stories where you shout the characters' names because you want them to behave like you imagine you would. I didn't shout. I didn't even stand. I sat very still and named 5 things I could see, like the therapist I once saw taught me for panic. The scuff on the baseboard, the tiny thread loose on the hem of my jeans, the splay of my shoelaces, the pale half-moons of my nails, the way the hall runner had a repeating pattern that was almost a puzzle if you looked long enough. Then I named 3 sounds that weren't the door. Fridge. Distant car. Mira turning in bed. Then 2 things I could smell. Soap. Dust. Then 1 thing I could taste. Mint gum, old now. The doorknob didn't turn again. The chair held. The house breathed. When the Merrills returned, Elaine took a step toward the back of the house without meaning to, the way people take a step toward a cry they hear. I noticed. Peter noticed me noticing again. It would have been a kindness to let it go, to leave them their careful arrangement. I have not always chosen kindness over curiosity. Who used to sleep in that room? I asked. There are very gentle ways to pry, and mine was gentler than most. I tried to keep my voice a soft rope that could be held or dropped. For a long beat no one answered. Then Peter said, my brother, when he visited. He smiled, practiced, and there was nothing technically untrue about that sentence. Elaine looked down at her hands. We should fix the weather stripping, she said to no one. Mira met me at the door while her parents found their umbrellas. She stood very close, as if she were showing me something tiny in her palm that I must not let the wind take. It likes you, she said. That's good. But that's worse. I walked home in a fine rain that seemed too light to get the job done. That night, my apartment made its own ordinary noises, which I loved for their stupidity. An upstairs neighbor's laugh, a radiator's exhalation, the plop of water into the kitchen sink from a faucet I should tighten. I tried to read and stopped after 2 sentences because the room on the other end of town had taught me something about attention and the price it exacts. I slept with the light on, and in the morning the room had followed me into my dreams. A door on every block, every one slightly open with a chair in front of it, everyone waiting. People think hauntings are about ghosts, about faces in mirrors and cold spots and the easy grammar of spook. Maybe sometimes they are. But more often, a haunting is a habit a place teaches you, and how your body starts doing that habit even when you're somewhere else. The house with the back room taught me to listen through doors. It taught me to think about the polite way to say no. It taught me that the difference between a ritual and a superstition is only whether or not it works. On the third Friday, the twins were drawing when I arrived. Not cartoons, not houses with triangle roofs, but very careful rectangles with lines inside them, like blueprints done in pencil. Mira had labeled hers with tidy letters: closet, lamp, bed, window. I looked closer and realized the lines were wrong. The proportions were slightly off in a way that made the room feel like it was leaning, as if gravity had been given different rules. Henry's drawing was almost the same except for one detail. He had sketched a door on the far wall that didn't exist in the house, smaller than the main door, set low with no handle. "What's that?" I asked, finding my smile and keeping it up even as something in my teeth felt cold. "The other door," he said. "Where it goes when it's not here." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like an address. I made cookies with them because there are only so many ways to fight a topology shift in your head, and one of them is sugar. We measured flour like it mattered very much, which it did. We set timers. We watched the oven light show us slow change. The house watched us back. I could feel it smiling, the way a cat smiles when it has allowed you to believe you are playing with it instead of the other way around. At 8:31, a little ahead of schedule, the doorknob turned again. Not just a test this time. A full, eager twist that set the chair's legs skittering a fraction on the runner. I was halfway down the hall before I realized I had moved. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a story is the part of you that can't stand not to see what happens next. I put my palm on the door and felt, at last, something that could be measured. A faint tremor, like the hum behind a stage curtain before the first line is said. "Please," a voice said. Not a person's voice, not even a voice made with air. But the word arrived anyway in exactly the shape that always works. I thought of every con I'd ever watched unfold in a stranger's eyes. How the smallest tilt of kindness is such a good lever. "Please." "No," I said, because I had understood the first rule. But I didn't step back. I listened. Behind the door, a page turned. Not paper, not truly, but that movement made of friction and hope. The room was reading without me. I wish I could say that's where I left it, that I obeyed my own boundary and took my hands off the wheel. But fear is a tide and curiosity is weather and habits are gravity, and I am a person who knows perfectly well that all those metaphors are just ways to say the same thing. You do what you keep doing until something stops you. I slid the book under the crack, just an inch so the room could feel the spine. Then I pulled it back, because I am not entirely a fool. "One page," I said. "I'll read one page. Then you leave them alone." That last clause, "you leave them alone," came out like a parent, and it pricked me with shame at my own presumption. But the room accepted it, or pretended to. Its attention tightened to a point that would have been pain if it were a body. I read. I stopped after one page. The room waited, and waiting is a kind of answer. Then, soft as breath, a second sound threaded into the quiet, one I hadn't heard before because it was almost a scent, almost a temperature. The sound of someone else listening with me. Not the room, not the house. The twins were still in bed. This listener came from beyond the wrong proportioned lines of the map in Myra's sketch. It came from that small door in Henry's drawing. It came like rain through a stovepipe. And for the first time, I understood something too clearly. The problem wasn't that there was something in the back bedroom. The problem was that the back bedroom was a door between two places, and I had been very polite to one side of it, not realizing that manners are different in the country on the other side. I closed the book. I set it down like a shield. "No," I said again and again because repetition builds walls. The knob kept still. The listening changed shape, went from curious to calculating, the way a person's expression shifts when they decide to sell something to you instead of ask. My mouth tasted like pennies. I took the chair and jammed it hard, harder than before, and whispered I'm sorry into the grain, though I couldn't have said to whom. In the morning, there were marks on the inside of the door. You could see them when the light came sideways in that strip before the twins woke. They were low, below the knob, spaced like the steps of a ladder. I didn't tell the Merrills. They didn't ask. We made our exchange of money and normalcy, and I walked home with the map of the room under my eyelids. That night, in my apartment, there was a knock on my closet door. Not loud, not insistent, just 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. I stood there for a long time, a person with their hand on a knob, listening to a country trying to apply for a visa. I didn't open my closet. I pushed a chair against it, and then the dresser, because there is nothing sillier than doing something that makes you feel better and nothing more necessary. On the 4th Friday, I asked Elaine a question I should have asked earlier, when asking it would have been ordinary. How long have you had this house? She blinked, smiled. 5 years this fall, she said. Why? It's nice, I said. It's a very itself. I had almost said it's polite. I had almost said it knows what it wants. We looked at newer places, she said. But they all felt like hospitals. Everything smelling like glue. She glanced toward the hall again, that microflinch now as familiar to me as the shape of their spoon handles. This one had character. Peter added, it appraised below market. The inspector said the back wall had settled. But it's been fine. He said fine like a prayer someone taught him once and told him it would work. I thought about hiring a contractor to rip that room to studs. I thought about what would be released or trapped. I thought about the way some problems are not fixed by breaking them open, only enlarged into different rooms with different doors. The twins were drawing again. This time their rectangles held fewer lines, as if simplicity were a safety. I sat with them on the floor and we used a ruler and I taught them about scale, how 1 inch can mean 1 foot or 10 or 100 depending on the world you choose. They understood too quickly. I had decided, finally, to tell the Merrills that they needed to move. Not because the house wanted me to open the door, but because of the other door, the small one none of us had consented to. I picked my moment poorly. It's hard to choose an elegant time for the words you have to get your children out. After tonight, I said when they came in from the rain. I can't. I stopped, because what I had planned to say was I can't do this again, and what came out was, I think you should consider selling. Their faces did the thing faces do right before they start performing. I watched them decide which version of the truth they would use for me. Elaine touched the edge of her scarf, smoothing nothing. Peter looked at the dining chair in front of the door and then looked away. It's a seller's market, he said, which was not the same as I know. It might have been the only sentence he could say without breaking. The twins, who had gotten out of bed because they heard the weather say something urgent against the windows, stood in the doorway. It doesn't want us to move, Mira said, very calm. Good, I said, and the firmness in my voice surprised me. Then don't tell it you're going. Just go. If this were a different kind of story, this is where the house would rage, the lights would blow, the door would bellow. But politeness is a sophisticated predator. The house did not do any of that. It did something worse. Tried another word. Please, it said again, but it said it in a new shape. It said it in a voice I knew, and it took me a half-breath to understand from where. It was my mother's voice, and then it was Zoe's laugh, and then it was the exact way Mira had said don't, and then it was my own voice saying no back to me, and all of those things folded together into a sound that fit perfectly into the knot in my chest where listening lives. I could have opened the door. I could have. It would have been so easy. The chair was a silly thing. The lock was cheap. My hand already knew the path. I did not open it. I walked to the kitchen and picked up the phone and dialed the number on the fridge that wasn't a parent's cell but the one labeled emergency. It went to a neighbor. I don't even remember what I said, but I remember the way the neighbor arrived like weather, all at once and everywhere, and how she did not need explanations. Some places instruct the people who live near them. She shepherded the twins into her car with a speed that felt like faith. She didn't look into the hall. She knew better. The Merrills left that night with overnight bags and the brittle faces of people who finally feel allowed to be scared. The house did not rage. It did not cry. It held perfectly still, as if stillness were a way to count down. I was the last one to the door. The blue paint looked almost black in the rain. I turned the key. I held the knob. I told the house thank you, and I don't know why I said that. Maybe because it had taught me something I did not want to learn, and that is also a kind of education. When we returned the next afternoon with a locksmith and a contractor and the neighbor and enough daylight to make bravery cheap, the back bedroom had changed itself into what the word storage finally means. Boxes, dust, an old lamp, no second door, no wrong proportions. The chair was exactly where we'd left it, and when we moved it, there was nothing on the back of the door but the pale scuffs of ordinary life. There were pages of the old hardback scattered on the floor, though 3 of them carefully torn, edges almost neat, as if the room had tried to pull the story through the crack and gotten only this far. We cleaned. We laughed. We measured the back wall. We talked about jacks and shims and joists and all the ways humans have invented to make the world less tilting. The contractor was the kind of man who carries a pencil behind his ear like a promise. He drew diagrams. He made lists. He said, "I've seen worse." And he meant, "I have a name for this." I moved away that fall. Not because of the house. Because the world keeps moving and money keeps deciding the shape of our days. My new apartment was bright and had a view of a laundromat where people pinned their needs to corkboards and hoped. I didn't take on babysitting jobs. I told myself I was too busy. Sometimes late, there would be 3 soft taps from somewhere that could be a pipe or a neighbor or nothing at all. I would say, into my own room with its obedient closet and impolite radiator. No, it felt like prayer. It felt like defiance. It felt like naming a boundary and then holding it with 2 hands. Last week, a postcard arrived from the Merrills. A photo of a different porch with lemon trees in pots and a cat whose expression suggested wealth. The note on the back was brief in that specific way people choose when the long version would take too much breath. We moved. The twins love their new school. Thank you. No forwarding address for the old place. No mention of blue paint. No apology to the house that had taught us all to be so careful. I pinned the postcard to my own corkboard with a plain silver tack. No flourish, just the weight of a small square of paper made heavier by what it didn't say. That night, when the radiator sighed and a neighbor shut a cupboard and a bus hissed at the stop, I felt the old pull, the little eagerness in the quiet that asks if I might open a door that isn't there. I didn't. I brewed tea. I read 1 page. I put the chair back under the desk because it belongs there. I slept. The wind dreamed whatever winds dream, and if it knocked on someone else's door, I hope they knew the rule. I hope, when it asked in the shape of someone they loved, they said no with kindness and then went on with their life, which is the most disobedient thing a haunted person can do. If you're reading this and your house is very polite and sometimes the back bedroom asks a question, here is the best thing I learned. Something truer than cinnamon and lemon oil and even the way children know the polite names of fear. Not every voice that knows your name deserves the dignity of an answer. Some things are doors. Some things are the rooms behind them. And some things, this is the worst of it and the hope in it, are you deciding which kind of person you're going to be in the hall with your hand on the knob, learning that no is a story you can keep telling until morning. Mira met me at the door while her parents found their umbrellas. She stood very close, as if she were showing me something tiny in her palm that I mustn't let the wind take. "It likes you," she said. "That's good. But that's worse." Before I could answer, she slipped back into the hallway, feet quiet on the runner. I wanted to follow her, but Peter's voice called me from the front. The polite transaction of coats and thanks was already underway, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that adults will almost always choose the comfort of completing a social script over chasing an interruption. That's how strange things keep happening in plain sight. Everyone too busy playing their part to step off stage. That night at home, my apartment felt smaller. The air seemed to have a weight to it, as though the day had brought back more than just my body. My closet door was shut, but I still dragged a chair in front of it, then laughed at myself for doing so. The laugh sounded hollow. I left the chair there anyway. The next Friday, the rain returned with me. It followed me from my apartment all the way to the Merrill's porch, drumming against my hood and running in cold lines down my neck. The porch light flickered, not the failing bulb kind of flicker, but the kind where light is trying to decide whether to acknowledge you. I pressed the bell and waited, my reflection in the glass fractured by raindrops. Elaine opened the door with her usual lemon oil smile, but her eyes darted to the hallway almost immediately, as though checking that it was still there. Peter was already in his coat, tugging his cuffs straight. They were in a hurry. That was the first time I noticed how much they always seemed in a hurry to leave the house. Henry and Mira sat cross-legged in the living room, but they weren't playing any game this time. They were waiting. That's the only word for it. Henry had a notebook open on his lap, and Mira held a pencil poised above the page, her gray eyes fixed on the far end of the hallway. They both turned toward me as one, like sunflowers following the same patch of light. "Do you want to see what we drew?" Mira asked before I even put my bag down. The pages were filled with lines, more maps, but these were different. Not neat rectangles anymore. The proportions were broken, warped like they'd been pulled in different directions. The back bedroom was huge on the page, taking up half the paper, with the hallway leading to it drawn at a strange angle, almost twisting. "It moved," Henry said matter-of-factly. I thought he meant they'd moved furniture, so I asked, "What moved?" "The room," Mira said. She tapped her pencil on the drawing, on a new shape at the bottom corner. A second small door, drawn shorter and wider than the first. "It's showing more now." I wanted to ask what that meant, but Peter was calling something to me from the kitchen, Elaine already opening the umbrella. The rain came inside in gusts as they stepped out, and then it was just me and the twins and the sound of drops against windows. The night began quietly, too quietly. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. Not me exactly, but for a certain time or a certain decision. I let the twins stay up a little later, thinking that if they were awake, maybe the thing in the back bedroom would wait. That was optimism pretending to be strategy. At 8:12, the sound began. Not taps this time. Not scraping. A slow, steady hum. So faint that at first I thought it was the refrigerator from across the house. But it wasn't the kind of hum you hear from machines, it was the kind you feel in your bones. My teeth ached faintly. The twins looked at me like they were checking whether I could hear it too. "That's new," Henry whispered. "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means," Mira said, "that it's close." The hum grew louder, not in volume, more in presence, as if it were moving through the walls toward us. I stood and walked to the hallway, keeping my pace measured. The chair was in place, angled slightly this time like it had been bumped earlier. The door behind it wasn't entirely closed, just enough of a gap to show darkness where there should have been wood. I knew better than to open it. I also knew better than to pretend it wasn't there. From the gap came a single cold draft of air, carrying the faintest smell of wet earth, like freshly dug soil. And then light. A thin slice of yellow light spilling out into the hall, but it wasn't the warm light of a lamp. It had that flat, unnatural tone of a bulb burning in a place with no windows. The hum deepened. My fingers itched to push the chair tighter against the door, but before I could move, something slid into view in that thin gap. And I, not human, not in the way it was shaped, nor in the way it moved. The iris was too large, the pupil a vertical slit that pulsed like it was breathing. The color was a deep, unnatural green, shot through with filaments of pale gold. It didn't blink. It just looked at me the way a predator looks at something it hasn't decided whether to eat. I couldn't move. My own breath slowed until it matched the rhythm of that hum. Behind me, I heard Henry's small voice, "Don't look at it too long." I broke eye contact and stepped back. The light vanished. The door was flush with the frame again, and the hum was gone as if it had never been. But the chair was now on the opposite side of the hallway. The chair sat there, legs splayed as if it had been dropped mid-stride. I knew I hadn't heard it move. The carpet under it was smooth, unmarked, like nothing had been dragged across it. It was as if it had simply appeared there. I forced myself to bend down, lift it, and put it back where it belonged in front of the door. My hands felt colder than the wood. When I turned, the twins were standing in the hallway now, shoulder to shoulder. Their expressions weren't fearful, more like they were bracing for something they'd already lived through before. "Sometimes it moves things," Henry said softly. "Sometimes it moves people," Mira added. "It can only move them if they're touching the floor." She looked down at my feet, then up at my eyes. "Don't stand too close." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but my throat felt too tight for sound. "Back to bed," I said. My voice was firmer than I felt. They didn't argue. They padded off, bare feet making almost no sound on the runner, and I followed them to make sure they got under the covers. Once I was sure they were settled, I went back to the chair. That was when I heard the whisper. It wasn't words, not at first. Just a soft sliding sound, like paper being turned slowly. Then came a faint syllable. Then another. My name. I knew it was my name not because it was pronounced clearly. It wasn't. But because it landed in my head with the weight of recognition, the way a smell can pull up a memory before you know why. I stepped back. The whisper followed. My name again, drawn out, each letter dragged through something heavy. Then a pause, and a new word I didn't recognize. It didn't sound English. It didn't sound safe. And then 3 taps, slow, precise, against the inside of the door. I froze. The air in the hallway seemed to grow thicker, like the house itself was leaning closer. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't take it out. There was no one I could call at that moment who would come fast enough, or believe enough to act. Instead, I whispered, "No." The sound stopped, but the quiet that followed wasn't a retreat. It was waiting. I retreated to the living room, switching on both lamps. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders and tried to focus on the TV. The sound was low enough not to wake the twins, but my eyes kept darting toward the hallway. It wasn't over. I knew it. At 9:04, the temperature in the living room dropped so suddenly that my breath puffed in front of me. The lamps flickered. Not both at once. The left one went dark, then came back, then the right one did the same. Back and forth like someone was walking between them. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, from the hallway. The problem was, they weren't coming toward me. They were pacing back and forth in front of the back bedroom door, like an animal wearing down a patch of ground before striking. I stood, not to confront it. I didn't have that kind of courage, but because I had the sudden, irrational thought that if I stayed seated, it might come and stand right behind me. The pacing stopped. A long, aching silence. Then the doorknob turned. It didn't open, just turned, and then turned back. Slowly, with patience. Like it wanted me to know it wasn't in a hurry. I stepped into the hallway, keeping my feet close together, not letting them stray over the faint seam where the hallway rug ended. I didn't touch the chair this time. I just looked at the door. It looked back. I can't explain how I knew it was looking at me, but I did. The wood felt like skin stretched over something that could shift. I imagined leaning my ear against it and hearing. Not a room, not furniture, but breathing. "Why me?" I asked before I could stop myself. I didn't expect an answer. I got one anyway. A knock. Then another. Then 2 more close together. Then silence. I don't know what it meant, but I knew it was meant. The silence after the pattern of knocks wasn't empty. It had weight, like a thing you could fold and set on a shelf if you had the nerve to touch it. I backed away without turning around. I didn't want to show it my spine. From the twins' room came the soft burr of whispering. I stood in the doorway and found them both awake. Sitting up, covers pulled to their chins, mirror images with different hearts beating under the same fabric. "It's pacing," Mira said. "I know," I said, and realized I did. "How long does it do that?" "Until it forgets we're here," Henry said. "Or until it remembers something it wants more." What does it want? The question was too large and too late, but it landed anyway. "People," he said. And he didn't say it dramatically. He said it like a grocery list. We don't let it, Mira added quickly, as if to apologize for how big the first answer was. You shouldn't talk to it in the hall. It hears better there. What about where should I talk to it? I asked because some terrible part of me was already arranging chairs for an interview with a door. In the kitchen, she said. By the sink. It hates running water. My laugh came out wrong. Who told you that? The house, she said. And in the long pause after, I understood that she meant the neighbor, the maps, the baby monitor, every night that none of us adults wanted to count. And the old babysitter. There was another? I said. They traded a look I didn't yet speak. Before you, Henry said. Her name was Ruth. She didn't come back. The word back dropped into my stomach like a coin into a deep well. What happened? She opened the door, Mira said. But only a little. She pinched her fingers together to show me how little, and I wanted very badly for that gesture to be a lie. Your parents? Don't like to talk about it, Henry said. They say she moved, but the neighbor whispers when she puts us in the car. Which neighbor? The one on the corner with the red mailbox, Mira said. She knows about houses. I did what I could do in that moment. I went to the kitchen and turned on the tap. The sound was ridiculous in how ordinary it was. The hiss of water had always meant washing dishes or bad coffee or running late. Now it meant the difference between being observed and being invited. I let it run until steam fogged the window over the sink and the silverware in the drying rack raised their thin, cold shoulders. The pacing quieted. I didn't know if that meant the house hated the sound or loved that I'd made it. Either way, the quiet that replaced it had no hum in it. I took that as a win because I needed to be able to call something a win. I left the water running and sat at the table with the twins. We played a game I made up on the spot where we took turns naming boring things in the room. Spoon, Mira said. Lamp, Henry said. Clock, I said. Crumbs. Tile. Napkin. Our voices smoothed the edges of the night with small, dull shapes. When the Merrills came home, we all pretended I hadn't left the water on. I could tell by the way Elaine glanced at the faucet and then deliberately at the ceiling that she had her own version of the rule. I could tell by the way Peter signed the check that he had been trying not to think of a number in his head and had failed. Has anyone, I said, as carefully as someone stepping over a sleeping dog, ever measured that room? In what way? Peter said, but his eyes had already gone past me, down the hall. With a tape, I said. With paper, to see if the inside matches the outside. He almost smiled. That's not how houses work, he said, and then he caught himself because of course sometimes it is. Elaine touched my sleeve on the way out, like she was pinning something on me that would keep me from forgetting what to do. Thank you, she said, for the water. At home I didn't sleep, not because my closet knocked, it didn't, but because my brain was teaching itself the shape of listening all over again. I got up at 3 and drew the floor plan of their house from memory, then drew it again from the way it felt. On the second sheet, the hallway bent a few degrees left that it didn't bend in real life. The back bedroom swelled like a bruise. The next afternoon, Saturday, daylight, safer in the way sunlight pretends to be law, I walked past the house with the red mailbox at the corner. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you drop by, but it was exactly the kind where neighbors pretend not to have dossiers on one another and then deliver casseroles with exactly the right spice level for the recipient's imagined digestion. The woman watering her plants out front didn't look surprised to see me stop. She handed me the hose as if I'd come to help and motioned with her chin toward the porch steps. You're the Friday sitter, she said. You made the water run. I don't know if it matters, I admitted. It does, she said. Or it doesn't. But doing it keeps your hands busy while your head works. That's a kind of matching. You've heard it, I said. The pacing. I've heard worse, she said. And the way she looked at me made me feel both held and weighed. Some houses like to talk. That one likes to teach. What did it teach Ruth? I asked before I could make the question polite. That the smallest door is not always the safest, she said. She thought because it was small it couldn't be for her. No one told her small things are for anyone who will become small to fit. The hose went heavy in my hand. Where did she go? Don't ask like it's a where, she said. And for a second I saw how many conversations like this one she had had on this porch with people who wanted geography to save them from theology. She's alive, last I heard. Moved to her sister's. Says she doesn't like basements. Do the twins? Know enough, she said. Know too much. Children always do. They're the correct size for understanding. I nodded at her garden because I needed to look at something that obeyed expected rules. Tomatoes in cages. Basil exploding into seed. A small army of marigolds stinking of safety. What would you do? I asked. She considered the question like a seamstress considers cloth. Put 2 chairs against the door. Not one. Heavier. Put a book you love beside it and one you hate on top of that. Keep the water running if you can afford the bill. And when it says your name, she said, eyes directly on mine now, answer with a question that has no answer. The thing on the other side doesn't like riddles. It eats answers. What kind of riddle? I said, and realized my voice was too eager. How many doors does a field have? She said. What color is a whisper? How old is a chair if no one sits? It won't hold it long. But it's a stutter. Sometimes a stutter is enough to walk past. I thanked her, which felt thin against the width of what she'd given me. On my way home, I bought marigolds that would die on my sill in 2 weeks because the light in my apartment is wrong for anything but dust. I bought a second chair at a thrift store, heavy oak, the kind that could anchor a storm if you believed in furniture like that. I practiced saying questions that tasted like fog. On Friday, I brought the chair. I didn't ask permission. I set it in the hallway and the twins helped me slide it into place without a word. They looked relieved, and I realized how often children are waiting for an adult to be sure of anything. That night began with the hum already present. No ramp, no flirting. It was there like weather. The house smelled faintly of that wet earth breath even though it hadn't rained in 2 days. The blue of the exterior paint looked darker through the window like someone had turned the saturation down on the world outside. At 8:06, there was a sound I hadn't heard before. A soft clack-click, like a latch trying itself from the inside. The chairs didn't move. The doorknob gave a single, rueful twist and then became still. The wood made that low stretch sound that isn't sound but memory. I could feel how the frame remembered being a tree. Do we read? Mira said, already reaching for the book we'd been sacrificing page by page. We read, I said, though my mouth hated me for the agreement. 1 page. That is the law. Law? Henry repeated, as if writing it somewhere in his chest. I sat cross-legged on the runner, a yard from the chairs, and read the next page aloud. The friendly monster had learned the boy's name too well, and kept repeating it until it had no meaning. The boy in the story distracted it by asking a question too big to answer. The coincidence made my teeth ache. When I finished the page, I did what the neighbor told me. I asked a riddle. What color is a whisper? I asked the door, and I could feel the instant it leaned closer to answer, and then the stall, and then the small, irritated scrabble of something that could not scratch. The room behind the door made a noise like turning a page underwater. The hum skittered. The heat came back into the air a degree, then another. I felt victorious for a second, which was foolish, but people need tiny victories the way lungs need small breaths between big ones. Again, the house said very softly, in the shape of the boy's voice from the book. Again. No, I said, and felt both parental and petty. I turned on the kitchen sink and let it run. The water's hiss wore a groove in the night. We made hot chocolate the way it should be made, with too much cocoa and a stubborn ratio of milk to water. And by the time the mugs were empty, the pacing had stopped and the house was pretending to be bored with us. Pretending is a kind of mercy. We went with it. At 9:47, as I stood to stretch, I saw something new. A hairline seam on the hallway wall opposite the back bedroom door. a vertical line so fine it could have been paint settling. Except that as I watched it, it widened the width of a blade. It was not a crack. It was a door deciding where it would be next. I didn't say a word. You learn to make silence your friend. I stepped in front of it to block it from the twins' view. The seam slowed, as if it didn't like being observed. I felt a pressure against my shins. A push like a friendly dog trying to insist I move. "Kitchen," I said, too calmly. "Now." They obeyed because we had been practicing obedience to small orders all night. We stood in the kitchen by the sink while the water argued its bright, stupid argument. I could feel with my whole body the new door reaching for a shape it had worn before. Couldn't do it all at once. Not with the chairs against the first door and us holding a line with Coco and questions and running water. "Why us?" I asked, not to the twins. "Because you talk back," Mira said. "Because you say no like it's a door." When the Merrills returned, faces tight, shoulders sloped, gratitude loud but fragile, I didn't ask the question I wanted to ask. "When did you first notice the extra door?" Because I knew the answer was not a date. It was a feeling that walked into a room and sat down and made itself at home. Instead I asked, "Can I come by tomorrow?" "Daylight." They looked at each other with the private speed of long married people exchanging a chapter of a book without moving their mouths. "All right," Elaine said. "We'll be home." I brought a tape measure and chalk and 4 sticky notes and 2 thumbtacks and more faith than those items deserved. The twins treated it like a science project, which helped because the alternative was religion. We measured the exterior wall in the backyard where the back bedroom sat. Then we measured the interior. It was off by 3 inches. 3 is not a horror number in itself. But the way Henry said 3 like it was a conclusion made it 1. We chalked around the baseboards. We drew a small box by the door and wrote in tiny letters inside the box "not a door." We placed 1 thumbtack in the floorboard to the right of the frame and 1 in the left and told ourselves we would notice if they migrated. We slid a paper under the door with a single sentence on it. "You cannot come into the hall." The paper came back 30 minutes later with the period torn away as neatly as a postage stamp. In the afternoon, the neighbor from the red mailbox arrived with a coiled length of red thread and a spool of salt the color of old bones. "This is not for magic," she said. "This is for you." Magic is what people call paying attention when they don't have the patience for it. She showed us how to string the thread low across the doorframe and tie it so it would snap if anything heavier than a fly tried to cross. We poured the salt, a thin, stubborn line, on the hall side. The twins insisted on making their own lines at the thresholds of their room and the bathroom and the closet where Henry keeps the rescue of his first-grade art. The house watched. I could feel the push of its stare in my eardrums the way you feel elevator pressure. At sunset, the blue paint betrayed the house, or tried to. The walls seemed to pulse, a shade darker around the back corner where the seam had been. The hum returned like someone sitting down at a piano and pressing a single key very slowly. The thread trembled. It didn't break. The first voice that came through that night wasn't mine going out of my body through the wood. It was my mother's laugh, the one she used when she was too tired to laugh properly but didn't want me to hear the worry. "Honey," it said. "Sweetheart." It sounded exactly like it did when I was 9 and had ruined a science project and she was trying to show me that failure wasn't a pit, it was a step. I put my hand on the counter because my knees had remembered how to be 9. "No," I said, and I didn't try to be kind about it. "No, please," it said, and then the word changed shape in that way it has. It slipped into other voices, other safeties. My therapist, my old teacher, Zoe's late-night text voice made of bad punctuation and better advice. It was elegant, that shifting. It wasn't a scream or a demand. It was hospitality weaponized. I said a riddle. I said another. I said, "How many doors does a field have? And what color is a whisper? And what shape is a promise before you make it?" The hum tripped. The voice lost the taste of my mother and retreated into something that had only corners. The thread snapped. I didn't see it happen. I heard it. A small, bright sound like a hair breaking. The salt line held. I don't know why. I wanted to thank it, which is ridiculous, but gratitude is cheap and it works. A shadow poured through the gap where the thread had been. It stopped at the salt like a dog at an invisible fence. It tested the air and then tested the floor. I stood as still as people stand when the animal across the field has a new idea about what it wants for dinner. The shadow retreated. Not fast. Not sulking. Clinical. Making a note. Salt here. Thread there. Voices that change shape. Water in the kitchen. 2 chairs. We slept at the neighbor's that night. Peter insisted, his voice finally breaking where it had been holding for weeks. He carried one of the chairs to the car himself, and I realized what a person of science looks like when the lab is burning. The next morning, the thumbtacks had moved, a 1/4 inch each inward, as if the floor were a mouth and the pins were something it was learning to swallow. The chalk box around the baseboard was smudged on the inner line. The paper minus a period had gained a comma in pencil that none of us had written. You cannot come into the hall and what? I whispered, before I could stop myself. And we are not going to give you the other half of the sentence, the neighbor said crisply, plucking the page up and sliding it into a Ziploc like evidence. You don't finish a shape for a thing that eats shapes. We made a plan. Not the kind of plan contractors make. The kind neighbors make when weather is coming. The twins pack a bag each, but we pretend it's for a sleepover because pretending is a stitch that holds longer than worrying. 2 chairs always. Water always if we can. No one talks in the hall. No one looks through the gap. No one says yes to their own name unless the person saying it is standing where you can put your hand on their shoulder. Elaine calls a realtor and doesn't use the word emergency even though it is. Peter calls a carpenter who knows a priest and says we need a quote on a wall. Please, before the frost. We all drink something hot as if temperature is a contract. The house listens while we do all this. It files the sounds away. It files us away. I feel it checking the seams of me, looking for a place where a second, smaller door might fit. That night, the closet in my apartment knocked. Not 3 polite taps. A slow drag and a single thud. I had left the chair there. I put the dresser against it. I sat on the floor with my back to wood and my hands folded and felt as holy as I have ever felt because terror is a kind of church. The following Friday is the one that will be the hinge of whatever story I tell myself later about why I did or didn't open a door. The afternoon light had that gold to it that makes people get married in fields. The twins were weirdly silly, the way kids are silly when an adult says don't be scared and they have too much adrenaline to comply. We built an obstacle course in the living room that had nothing to do with doors and everything to do with being in charge of gravity for an hour. We used painter's tape and pillows and the grudge of a couch leg against a rug. We laughed. It mattered. At 8:03, the seam on the opposite wall widened again. This time it wasn't fine. It was deliberate. It was the difference between a paper cut and a slice that requires stitches. I heard the whisper before I saw the light. Not my name. Not words. The sound of someone riffling through a stack of paper to find a page they had hidden there themselves. What if we don't do this tonight? I said to the house, because bargaining is a habit and fools are patient. What if you take a night off and we read to the couch? It answered with the sound of a hinge on the far side of a door no one had installed. The neighbor was already at the porch. She had her own timer for the hum by now, and she didn't knock. She came in with a coil of new thread, thinner, silk, meaner. We laced it across in 3 lines this time. Low, middle, high. We poured salt like it was going out of style. I said riddles in the doorway until I hated the taste of my own voice. The twins took turns reading 1 sentence each from the book, as if dividing the words among more mouths would make them less delicious. And then the line we'd drawn around the world failed. Not dramatically. The high thread broke without sound. The middle one frayed and held. The low one held. The doorknob didn't move. The seam didn't open farther. The light stayed the wrong shade of yellow. But something in the air changed the way a person changes posture when they decide to stand up from a chair. I stepped into the hall. Not a footstep. the pressure of something occupying the air in the shape of a step. The salt line went dull, like snow when it has been walked on and then refrozen. The middle thread wavered. The neighbor reached and pressed her palm flat to the wall beside the door and said, quietly, in a voice that sounded like my mother and like the librarian who taught me to whisper and like the ocean when you're under it but not drowning yet. Not tonight. I said, how many doors does a field have? And Mira said, what color is a whisper? And Henry said, how old is a chair if no one sits? And we made a braid out of our voices and looped it around the shape in the air. For 3 breaths it worked. On the 4th breath the shape tugged. The chair nearest the door scraped an inch, then another, like a polite person clearing their throat before asking to pass. The salt thinned in one place where a breeze would have made no difference. In the kitchen, the faucet choked and sputtered though no one had touched it. The light above us dimmed. Out, the neighbor said, and the way she said it made the word a rope. We put our hands on it without needing to find it with our eyes. We left, not because we lost, because you don't win at doors. You survive them or you don't. We took the twins and the mugs and the book and the ridiculous red thread and we walked out into the night that had decided to be kind with stars. The house watched us go with all its windows. I didn't look back. Looking back is a contract. On the sidewalk, Mira took my hand, her fingers cold and fierce. It's going to move the door, she said, both prediction and eulogy. Let it, I said, and was surprised by the calm in my voice. We'll move our house first. Where? Henry asked, the first time he'd sounded like he was the age he is. Anywhere else, I said. Where the field's door is just a gate and not an idea. They slept at the neighbor's. I slept on my couch with my shoes on. At dawn, a message from Elaine. We listed. I didn't know whether to feel relief or guilt for making the world smaller for other people in the future. Then another, open house Sunday. Then, an hour later, the door moved. I went over. Daylight again. Daylight wearing its bravest hat. The back bedroom door still existed where it always had. Chairs in their station. Salt resigned along the line. Thread replaced. Thumbtack stubborn. But the seam on the opposite wall was gone because the wall itself had become a door. Not well made. Not finished. A rectangle of wood that didn't match anything in the house. Slightly too short, as if whatever made it thought people were shorter than they are. No knob. No frame. Just a door leaning into being. What do we do? Peter asked, and I loved him a little for asking it out loud where the house could hear his fear and we could all stop pretending it was only mine. We don't open it, I said, and we don't answer it, and we leave. He nodded. He nodded again, like a person who hears instructions in a language they barely know and trusts the kindness of the speaker more than the grammar of the sentence. Elaine held the twins' backpacks in both hands like a weight she was practicing for. The neighbor stood guard with her thread and her stubborn jaw and her plants that hate her soil but love her discipline. We left. The blue house stayed. It would be someone else's blue soon, or white, or the color people paint when they want to pretend nothing has ever happened there. The listing would say charming. It would say character. It would lie the way listings lie because they are small doors for people who are willing to become small to fit through them. On my way home, I passed the laundromat corkboard where there is always a babysitting ad curling at the corners. Someone had pinned a blank note card with no phone number and no words, just a single, neat period in the center of the card. I stood and looked at it until the attendant asked if I needed change. That night, my closet didn't knock. The chair stayed where I had pushed it months ago. I slept, and in my sleep I stood in a hall with a door, and I said no like it was a story I was telling myself for the first time in the 1000th. In the morning, I wrote a new rule on a note card and stuck it to my own refrigerator with a cartoon magnet shaped like a lemon. Not every voice that knows your name deserves an answer. I made tea. I read a page. I didn't tear it out. The field outside my window had no doors anyone could see. The whisper in my apartment was just the radiator being vain. The blue house across town practiced its own politeness for a new set of eyes. Some things preen when they're about to hunt. Some things go very still. 2 days later, a message from Zoe. Found SMTH weird at estate sale. You home? She sent a photo. A heavy oak chair. A book with 3 pages neatly torn. A bundle of red thread. A key that didn't fit any lock in her apartment. She'd bought them because they were cheap and because everything is a story waiting for someone to narrate it. I looked at the chair. I looked at the thread. I looked at the pages. I said no out loud to my empty room, and then I texted her. Bring only the chair. She sent back a skull emoji and the word vibes. Then another. You okay? Then you never say no to weird. That's how I knew to worry. I told her I'd explain over tea. She said no cocoa, I hate cocoa. And I knew it was truly Zoe because the thing on the other side of the door only knows the shape of a person, not the petty ridiculous likes that make a person unbearable and beloved. When she arrived, we sat in our own kitchen by the sink because I had learned my lines. I told her a story without saying the word haunted. I said house a lot. I said door like it was both police and prayer. She listened the way people listen when they're trying not to glance at their phone. At the end she said, "Can I see your closet?" Like a tourist. I said no, and she respected it, and that felt like the first non-supernatural magic I'd seen in weeks. On Friday, I did not go to the Blue House because the Blue House had decided it would not be mine to guard anymore. I went to the lake instead. I practiced saying no to a horizon that can't hear you. I threw the red thread into the water and watched it sink without looking like it sank. I waited until the wind had a bad dream and tried the door of the world, and then I went home, and when my closet tapped 3 times, I said a riddle into the wood, and then I said my own name into my own mouth like an answer no one was allowed to eat. For almost 2 weeks, the quiet felt like a vacation I hadn't paid for. The chair stayed against the closet in my apartment, untouched. My phone didn't light up with late-night texts from the Merrills. The neighbor with the red mailbox still waved from her porch, but it was the kind of wave that says we're both pretending nothing happened. Even the twins slipped out of my dreams. But quiet is never just quiet. It's the time something else takes to move its pieces. It started on a Tuesday in the late afternoon. I was in the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle, arguing silently with myself over whether sugar disguised as fiber could still be called breakfast, when a girl's voice behind me said, "What color is a whisper?" It froze me so completely I didn't turn. My hands stayed on the box. My heart was a bird hitting glass. I didn't need to look because I knew that question, and I knew no child should have been close enough to ask without me hearing footsteps first. I made myself move, not toward the voice, away. I left the box, the aisle, the cart. I walked straight out the automatic doors into the parking lot sunlight, which felt too bright, too empty. My car was on the far end, and I took the long way around, scanning each row. No girl. No sound of sneakers on pavement. Only the hum of carts being corralled. The next day, there was mail under my door. No envelope, just a single page torn from a book I recognized without wanting to. The one the twins and I had been reading. It was a middle page, one we hadn't reached. In the margin, in faint pencil, was written, "The small door opens inward." I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I slid it into a plastic sleeve the way the neighbor had taught me, and I put it in the drawer where I keep expired warranties and a photo of my mother laughing. That drawer doesn't open easily. I didn't want it to. On Friday, Zoe came over again, not with a chair this time, but with a bundle of envelopes she'd picked up from her P.O. box. She tossed them onto my table and said, "You're pale. Bad week." The easy laugh on her face didn't match the way she was watching me out of the corner of her eye. She knew something was wrong. I think she was giving me a chance to lie. Instead, I said, "I think it found me." She frowned. She didn't finish. Some words are doors too. I told her about the grocery store, about the torn page. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't suggest it was coincidence. She just said, "Do you want me to stay over?" That night, the closet didn't knock, but the chair moved. We were watching a movie, something bright and noisy to chase away the habit of listening, when Zoe went to the kitchen for more popcorn. She came back and stopped in the doorway. Uh, she said, pointing. The chair wasn't against the closet anymore. It wasn't even in the bedroom. It was in the living room, angled slightly toward the TV, as if it had been pulled up to watch with us. I didn't hear it move. I didn't hear anything. I put it back, but my hands shook harder than they had in the Blue House hallway. Because in the Blue House, I could pretend it was tied to that one place. Now, in my apartment, there was no such leash. We didn't sleep much. Zoe stayed in the living room, stubbornly cheerful, as if pretending she wasn't scared could make the room believe it too. I left the hallway light on all night. Around 3:17 a.m., I woke to find her sitting in the chair, in front of the closet. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something just inside the door. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, the way people's are when they're halfway inside someone else's story. I said her name once, then twice. On the third time, she blinked hard, like surfacing from underwater, and looked at me in confusion. "You were—" I started, then stopped. "Did you hear something?" She rubbed her face. "I thought you called me." I didn't say that I hadn't. I didn't say that I knew exactly what had called her. By morning, she didn't remember walking to the chair. By Sunday, the page in the drawer had moved to the kitchen table. And that's when I knew. The thing that had lived in the Blue House had learned something from me too. I didn't pick the page up. I didn't have to. I'd been telling myself a comforting lie since the night in the Blue House. Namely, that the rules were furniture I could move with me. Water, thread, salt, riddles, chairs. What I hadn't admitted was that the thing on the other side had rules, too, and it had been watching me learn mine. I called the neighbor with the red mailbox because daylight makes asking for help easier. She answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. I told her about the grocery store, the page, the chair moving in the night. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "It has hands now. What does that mean?" "It means you gave it a job," she said. "You asked it to hold its hunger with riddles, to wait behind salt, to answer when called. It will try to be better at the job than you are. It will try to be hired." I didn't. I stopped because I had. I taught it how to talk to me without screaming. I taught it how to shape itself into almost people. "What do I do?" "The same," she said, like good advice were a circle. "But stricter. And you move if you can." "The Merrills moved," I said. "They moved the house," she said, voice softening. "You move you." Before I could say that money is a rule, too, that leases are doors you don't open until the right month, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened, bracing for a voice that wasn't a voice. "Hi," a woman said brightly. "I'm the agent listing 14 Linden. We have an open house today, noon to 4, and the owners gave me your number. They said you know some quirks. If you have any notes for me, I would love to, be prepared." Prepared. As if you can put on boots and a sensible jacket and be ready for a thing that knows your name. I called back. She was young from the sound of her, with that trained perkiness realtors have when they're trying to keep a family's finances from starving. I told her the easiest things. Keep the back bedroom closed. Keep the kitchen tap running low. Don't let anyone stand in the hallway too long. Do not under any circumstances let a stranger say your name from behind a door. I didn't say ghost. I didn't say monster. I said draft and door and plumbing like you can keep a person alive by feeding them nouns. She laughed once, politely, and said, "That's very thorough. Thank you." "I'm coming by," I said, surprising myself. "I can help." "Are you with the owners?" "No," I said. "I'm with the door." There was a long silence. 12 to 4, she said. "Thank you for your thoroughness." Zoe insisted on driving me. She put the chair, her estate sale chair, the heavy oak with the mundane, consoling weight, into the trunk with a grunt and said, "We're not taking thread. It's too theatrical." "Thread is a tripwire," I said. Theatrical is a feature. She brought the thread anyway because she is my friend and because she doesn't like cocoa, which is exactly the sort of detail a thing pretending to be her will never remember. We arrived 5 minutes before noon to find a string of cars already peppering the curb. The lawn had been mowed, the beds edged, the blue freshened with a color you'd call sky, if you've never really looked at the sky. A sign with a smiling headshot and the word welcome leaned by the front walk. I wanted to turn it around so the word faced the house. The agent met us in the entryway, hair smooth, blazer sharper than any blade in the kitchen. She had a clipboard with a sign-in sheet, a bowl of wrapped candies, and a smile that was not trained to fathom salt. "You must be..." She glanced down. "Nora?" I nodded. "Turn on the tap now," I said. And she did, obedient before she realized obedience was what I'd asked for. When she did realize, she smiled awkwardly. "Fun superstition," she said. "It's a rule," I said, because I was done pretending rules are silliness. The first couple walked in like couples do, looking down at their feet to judge square footage by vibe. The woman had a tote bag that said, "Eat, pray, love the craftsman." The man had a hat that wanted to be taken seriously. They moved through the living room, murmuring the measured vowels of people doing math under their breath. They walked the hall, slowing instinctively as the runner guided them toward the back bedroom. "Kitchen first," I said, stepping into the aisle of the hall like a flight attendant blocking a service cart. "Great natural light." "Actually," the woman said with bland politeness, "I'd like to see the bedrooms." She was already drifting toward the closed door, as if it were a magnet for people who daydream about reading nooks. "Later," I said. "Trust me." She tilted her head like she was listening to a distant radio. "Did you say my name?" "No," I said. So quickly I surprised us both. 2 more groups. One man alone, the suspicious kind who would ask about the age of the roof and then the bones of the neighborhood. A family with a baby asleep in a sling and an older child trailing a sticky hand along the wall, leaving translucent fingerprints that I wanted to salt. I stood in the hall and smiled with all my teeth and became the kind of uncomfortable human obstruction that makes strangers adjust their route. The tap hissed. The house hummed under it, like a harmony you don't hear unless you know the song. At 12:37, a woman with gray hair and a red scarf stepped directly to the back bedroom and put her ear to the door. "Don't," I said sharp, because there are moments you must be impolite to keep people. She blinked at me. "Do you hear it?" she asked, and her voice had the eager brightness of a person who has always suspected their life could be more interesting if only it were haunted. "It hears you," I said. "Step back." She did. She obeyed the way people obey when your tone hits the exact note their childhood taught them to respect. I felt the house shift, like a disappointed host. By 1:10, the sign-in sheet was full of names I did not want the door to learn. The agent refilled the candy bowl, fluffed a pillow, made a joke about traffic that spent itself halfway across her tongue. Twice, I caught her glancing at the hall like you glance at a cliff when you know you could jump if you decided to. "You're doing great," I told her, like we were at a performance and the audience was rude. "Is this usual?" she asked, gesturing vaguely not at the house but at the space around it, where the air felt thick as syrup. "I don't have a usual anymore," I said. At 1:28, the baby in the sling woke and let out a single, sharp, purely human cry. The sound struck the back bedroom door like a thrown stone. The doorknob twitched. Not much, but enough that the agent flinched and laughed at herself and then blushed for laughing. The father, tired, friendly, a man who has decided life is only as dangerous as the things he can assemble, said, "Is that a draft?" As if that word could pull the teeth out of anything. "It's an old house," the agent said, grateful for a cue. "It's a hungry house," I said, quieter. He blinked at me because he had been expecting a joke, not a diagnosis. At 1:41, someone wrote their name on the sign-in sheet in tiny, cramped letters. Ruth. The R was the kind you learn in 3rd grade and never correct. I looked around the room and found no one alone, no one looking back at me. When I looked again at the sheet, the name had smudged itself, as if it had tried to become smaller. I stepped outside for air that didn't sit in my lungs like a thought I couldn't finish. On the porch, the neighbor with the red mailbox stood with a Tupperware of cookies because of course she did. "For your agent," she said, and then looked at my face and added, "For you." "It's learning mine," I said. She nodded. "They always do. That's the worst part and the useful part. It means it can be distracted." "By what?" "By you," she said, as if that were a kindness. By 2-0 the crowd thinned. The agent's smile had exhausted its training. I drank water and felt it settle in my stomach like a weight I might need later. At 2:13, a boy of about 8 slunk down the hall when his parents were admiring the crown molding. "Children are doors." He put his hand on the back bedroom knob because of course he did. "Don't," I said, and the word fractured under the urgency I couldn't hide. He looked at me like I was a killjoy and withdrew his hand, leaving a smear that looked like fog on the brass. I wiped it away with the corner of my sleeve and felt ridiculous and holy at once. At 2:31, 3 taps from inside the back bedroom. Not loud. Careful, like someone showing they knew how to hold a delicate thing and wanted to be trusted with more. The agent's eyes widened very slightly. "Old houses," she said to a couple examining a closet. Her voice did not shake. "Is there water damage back there?" the hat man asked, suspicious as a smoke detector. "Only to your sense of proportion," I muttered, then said louder, "No, sir. Good bones." At 3:07, the hum arrived the way a storm arrives on a day the forecast declined to warn you. It sank into the floorboards and climbed up through my shoes. The toddler trailed past again, his sticky hand reaching for the seam on the opposite wall. I moved without thinking and scooped him up, all polite smiles to his mother. "Sorry, wet paint," I lied. My heart rattled its cage. The agent came to stand near me. Should we end early?" Behind her bright, brittle professionalism, the animal part of her brain had made a small, unfair decision about survival and wanted permission to obey it. 53 minutes, I said. "We can manage 53 minutes. It was at 3:22 that the door tried something new. It spoke not in voices it had borrowed, not in knocks or hums, but in an absence. The kitchen tap stopped. Not a sputter, not a choke. Simply ceased. The agent stared at the sink as if reprimanding an employee. "Excuse me," she said to the house, and I loved her for it. I ran the faucet. Nothing. The pipes held their breath. The house exhaled in the hall. "Everyone," I said, too loudly, "let's take a look at the backyard." I clapped my hands like a counselor. The neighbor on the porch understood at once and swung open the back door as if I'd texted her a script. "Oh, the light," she said, lying to save us. The tide of bodies moved toward the kitchen and then out, all the better to talk about fences and sun exposure, all the easier to keep them from settling where the house could count them. A lone man stayed, the suspicious one in the hat, turning slowly in the living room like a compass finding north. He stood at the edge of the hall. He said, "Into the air, into the wood." "Nora!" My name landed in me like a slap. I had the wild thought that if I didn't answer, he would. I took one step forward and met his eyes. "That's my name," I said, not loud but with the shape of ownership. "You don't get to use it." He blinked, face rearranging into the agreeable mask adults wear when corrected by someone they didn't expect to have authority. He took off his hat. "Apologies," he said reflexively, and left. The faucet coughed. A thin stream returned, then a steady one. The house conceded the round with terrible grace. At 3:49, the last couple left, full of plans that would never fit inside these walls. The agent locked the door, then leaned back against it and let herself be the age she was. "Is it like this on showings?" she asked, and then laughed at herself. "What am I saying? There are no showings like this." "You did well," the neighbor said. "You did not sell anyone to the door." The agent swallowed. Will someone buy it? I mean, could they? Someone will buy something, the neighbor said. The question is what it is and who they think they are. We walked the hall together, 3 women and a house that had decided to try a different shape tomorrow. Salt thin as a hair across the floorboards. Thread coiled on my wrist like a bad bracelet. The chairs sat faithful at their post like good dogs with no idea what wolves are. On the way out, the agent took my hand. Sudden, almost childish. Do I take this listing? She asked. Behind the question were smaller ones. Do I believe you? Do I believe me? Do I leave my job over a hum? You tell the truth but make it sound like a draft, I said. You sleep with your TV too loud for a week. You don't say your own name when you're alone. You finish the sentence you started on the paper. What sentence? She said. You cannot come into the hall, and I didn't finish it. And we are gone, I said instead. We are gone. That night, I pulled the chair back against my closet and sat on the floor with my back to it. My knees up, my hands folded. I spoke my own rules out loud. Not because they were magic, but because ritual is the rope you throw yourself across a river. Running water if I can. Riddles if I must. No looking through gaps. No answering from the hall. No saying yes to my own name unless the hand on my shoulder is warm. Around 2. A sound from inside my closet. Not a knock. A slide. Like a hand along wood, searching for a seam. Please, it said. And I almost threw up because it had stuck the landing on my mother's tone so perfectly that for a half second I was 9 years old. And the science project hadn't worked. And the kitchen smelled like burnt sugar. No, I said. And then, because I'd learned this wasn't enough anymore, I asked, how many doors does a field have? Silence. Then a knock too careful to be kind. The door was learning to curtsy. 2 days later, a text from Elaine. Offer accepted. The emoji she chose to follow it with was a house and a leaf and a sun, the kind of emojis people send when they want to tell you the story is over. I sent back a heart because you can't send back a salt line or a chair. Then another message. They waived inspection. My stomach went cold. Then, they're relocating from out of state. No kids. She didn't type a skull. She didn't have to. I went to the neighbor's porch because there are some things you must say while your hands hold a plastic cup of weak lemonade. Should we warn them? We did, she said. We put the word draft in their ear. We put the word quirk under their tongue. We put a pebble in the shoe of their certainty. It's all you can do without being called a liar. I could knock, I said. I could go over there and say the words out loud. You could, she said. They will nod and call you dear if you are unlucky, ma'am, if you are luckier. And then you will be the story their friends tell at dinner. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is set rules where your hands reach and hope gravity behaves. What if it doesn't? I asked. Then you stand in a hallway with a chair and a mouth full of questions and you become boring, she said. Boredom is a weapon. Make the thing that eats attention starve. I went home and made my apartment boring. I closed the blinds not all the way but almost. I cleaned my sink until water sounded louder in it. I put the torn page back in the drawer and then I taped the drawer shut and then I pushed the dresser against it because a ritual is allowed to be ugly. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb at night and told 3 friends, separately, that if they ever got a late message from me saying, come in, they should wait in the hall and call my name from the doorway until I opened the door myself. For 6 nights, nothing. For 6 nights, the chair stayed, the tap worked, the salt held its line in my head. I slept, shallow and busy, like a pond with dragonflies skimming, never breaking the skin. On the 7th, a thud woke me. Not from the closet, from the front door. 3 slow knocks. The kind no one in city apartments uses because everyone knows better than to be polite at night. I sat up. I didn't move. The knocks came again. My name followed, perfect, mine. I thought of the hat man. I thought of the agent. I thought of Ruth's cramped R. Who is it? I asked because that is the oldest riddle. It's me, the voice said, and said my name again as if signing for a package. I stood but didn't go closer. Put your hand under the door, I said, because that was a thing you could do with humans and not with rooms. A pause. Then laughter. My mother's, my therapist's, a stranger's polished chuckle. Don't be ridiculous, the voice said, and it was almost Zoe's, but Zoe would have said, LOL. Even in real life, because she is the kind of person who types her sounds when she speaks. I went to the kitchen and turned on the sink. The voice at the door made a small, irritated sound. Really? It said. We're doing this? We are always doing this, I said, and sat at the table and waited for morning with a glass of water I didn't want. The knocks didn't come again. The sun did. The next day I got a text from an unknown number. Hi. New neighbor at 14 Linden. We're having a few folks over tonight. Housewarming 7:10. Drop by? The message had 2 champagne flutes clinking and a smiling house and no skull. I stared until the screen went dark. Then I typed, I'm busy tonight. Then I deleted it. Then I typed, congratulations. Then, because it felt like putting a chair in front of a door from far away, I added, keep your hallway lights on. I went anyway. I stood across the street at 9:45 with the neighbor from the red mailbox. Both of us pretending to be on our phones like teenagers. Both of us counting the number of people who went in and out. Laughter spilled from the house in that bright, jagged way party laughter has when everyone is new to everyone else. Music grinned from the living room. The blue of the paint looked innocent as a picnic blanket. At 9:58, the music stuttered. Not stopped. Stuttered like a CD when you move it without respect. The voices carried on a few beats out of sync, as people do when they haven't yet agreed something is wrong. Then a small silence. Then 2 knocks you could use in a classroom to get attention. Don't, I said to no one, to everyone. No one heard me. The neighbor squeezed my arm once, hard, as if to keep me from running across the street and becoming a person who throws open doors because a muscle said so. The townhouse next to mine flicked off its lights for the night like a blink. Somewhere down the block a bus exhaled. The house on Linden held its breath to see who would break first. I did not. That, more than anything I have done since this began, felt like a miracle. 10:04, the music resumed. Laughter resumed. The party went on, the way the world insists on going on at the edges of other people's rooms. The neighbor exhaled and said, Not tonight. Not tonight, I echoed. On my way home, I passed the laundromat. The corkboard had a new card pinned among the babysitting ads and piano lessons and couch for sale notices. No phone number. 1 word. Hand-printed in neat block letters. N-O. No underline. No exclamation point. No explanation. It wasn't advice. It was a door standing by itself on a board, waiting for the kind of person who would walk through it. When I reached my apartment, I left the chair where it was. I left the light on, I turned the tap so it sang, and I said a riddle to the air just because sometimes you have to move your mouth into the shape of safety before safety arrives. Then I opened my book, the one with 3 pages missing, and I read the next page without reading ahead, and when I got to my own name printed there, not mine but a character's, a coincidence with teeth, I didn't stop. I kept going. I made my voice boring. Outside, the wind had a bad dream and turned a corner. Inside, the door remembered that patience is not the same as power. And somewhere, in a house I used to guard and in a house I may have to guard again, the smallest door learned that inward doesn't mean in. 3 days passed without incident. That's how it always starts, the house or whatever walks behind its doors, letting you breathe just long enough for your guard to soften. I kept my habits sharp anyway. Chair in place. Salt refreshed. Sink running for short bursts in the evenings. It all felt performative, like setting a stage for an audience that might have left already. But I knew better than to assume absence. The neighbor with the red mailbox called me one morning, her voice low, the way people talk when they've stepped away from a group. They've put curtains in the back bedroom, she said. Who? I asked, though I didn't need to. The new couple. The ones who bought Linden. Saw them hanging them up last night. She paused long enough for me to hear the sound of her watering can tilt. They chose red. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means, she said, they wanted the room to feel warmer. We didn't talk long. Some conversations are best left half-finished so they can't be overheard by the wrong walls. That night, just after 1 in the morning, I woke to find my bedroom darker than it should have been. The streetlight outside usually painted a thin amber stripe across my floor through the blinds. But now, nothing. I checked the window. The streetlight still burned, steady and bright. The darkness was inside the room, and it was shaped, a rectangle, the same proportions as a door, leaning against my wall where no door had ever been. Not flat either, it breathed just enough to change the way the air bent around it. I didn't move closer, didn't dare. Instead, I sat up and reached for the glass of water on my nightstand. It was warm, too warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight that didn't exist here. I set it back down and kept my hand around it like a tether to reality. The rectangle didn't move, but it was listening. I could feel it pressing against my chest. Not physically, but in that subtle, steady way a question pushes into your mind until you answer. I didn't answer. After maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like 50, the shape pulled in on itself, folding like paper until there was only darkness again. I turned on the lamp and left it burning until morning. The next day, I went to the laundromat. The corkboard had changed again. The card that had said NO was gone. In its place was another plain card. This one with 4 words written in the same neat block letters. Who keeps saying NO? It wasn't signed. That Friday, the couple at Linden hosted their second gathering, smaller, just a handful of friends. I told myself I wasn't going to watch this time, that I would trust them to handle their own home, their own guest. But at 9:12 p.m., the wind shifted in that way I've learned to recognize. It wasn't the temperature or the smell, it was the attention in the air. The street seemed to tilt toward the house. I found myself outside before I realized I'd grabbed my coat. The neighbor with the red mailbox was already on her porch, hands in her sweater pockets, eyes fixed down the block. They'll open it tonight, she said. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact, spoken like she'd already seen it happen. We didn't move closer. Sometimes distance is the only weapon you have left. Through the living room window, I could see shadows shifting. People leaning, laughing, talking with that casual ease of the unafraid. Then I saw him, a tall man near the hall. Not the new owner, not anyone I'd seen before. He stood too still for too long. And when the woman in the red curtains came to join him, he didn't turn his head to greet her. He just gestured toward the back bedroom, his arm bending at an unnatural angle, like the joint wasn't where it should be. She laughed, and then she followed him. We didn't hear screaming. We didn't hear anything at all. 10 minutes later, the living room was quieter. Not silent, just missing one layer of sound. When the guests left around 11:30, she didn't come out with them. The next morning, a moving truck was parked out front. The man carried boxes to the curb. No sign of her. By noon, the curtains in the back bedroom were gone. The window gaped bare and black. That night, the wind found my apartment again. 3 taps at my closet. A pause. Then, in her voice, the woman with the red curtains, soft, coaxing. "It's warmer here." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat in the chair, the salt line at my feet, and waited for the voice to forget my shape. It hasn't yet. The voice didn't come back the next night, or the one after. That was worse. Silence from it wasn't safety, it was study. It meant it was learning me again, the way it had in the blue house, the way it had in my apartment. It had learned enough before to follow. Now it was learning to wait. I started carrying the rules with me everywhere. A small packet of salt in my coat pocket. A length of red thread coiled in my bag. A handful of riddles memorized like emergency exits. What color is a whisper? How many doors does a field have? How old is a chair if no one sits? One Wednesday, on my way back from work, I passed Linden. The for sale sign was gone. No car in the drive. The curtains were white again, clean, plain, harmless. The blue of the house looked the same as it always had. I might have walked past. I might have convinced myself I could. But as I passed the sidewalk in front, I saw something in the second-story window, just for a heartbeat. Not a person. Not exactly. A face watching from too close to the glass. Not leaning. Not blinking. Just there, like it had always been there and I'd only now noticed. I kept walking. That night, I woke to find the chair in my bedroom wasn't against the closet anymore. It wasn't even in the room. It was in the hallway, angled toward the front door. The salt line at my closet was unbroken. The salt line at my front door was scattered, as if a breeze had passed through and taken half of it with it. I sat down right there on the floor, heart pounding so hard I could taste it, and I waited for something, anything. But nothing came. The next day, a plain white envelope was slid under my door. Inside, the same neat block letters I'd seen before, just one sentence. The smallest door opens tonight. No address. No name. By evening, the air in my apartment was heavy, electric, like before a storm. I set the chair against the closet. I refreshed the salt. I tied the red thread low and high. I turned the kitchen tap just enough for the water to hiss. And I sat. At exactly midnight, the tap stopped. The hum began, not from the closet, but from the wall to my left. A seam was forming, faint but definite, running floor to ceiling. The smell of wet earth seeped through, rich and wrong. The seam widened. Not much. Just enough to make room for a shadow. Not cast made. It stepped into my apartment, stopping just shy of the salt line at my feet. It didn't knock. It didn't speak. It just waited. My mouth was dry, my mind blank except for one thought. Don't give it anything it can keep. So I said the oldest riddle I knew, the one my grandmother had asked me when I was small enough to still believe in monsters and kind enough to give them answers. What belongs to you, but others use it more? It didn't answer. It leaned closer. My name, I said, and I said it like I was slamming a door. The seam in the wall shuddered. The hum broke. The shadow retreated, folding back through the gap, which sealed behind it as if it had never been there. The water in the kitchen began to run again. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I swept up the salt, untied the thread, moved the chair back to its place against the desk. I didn't replace them. I don't know if that means I've stopped playing its game, or if I've just given it a better chance. Maybe both. The corkboard at the laundromat has a new card today. It's blank. No message, no number, no name. Just a perfect square of paper waiting. When I pinned my laundry ticket next to it, I heard, so faint I could almost convince myself it was nothing, 3 soft taps, pause, 3 soft taps. I didn't answer. And if you're reading this, remember, not every voice that knows your name deserves the dignity of an answer. Some doors open inward. Some open both ways. And some never close.